Charter Review Committee to order. Welcome, everyone. We'll go to number 2, roll call.
Member Staub? Member Hanneman? Member Wise? Member Wilkin McCullough? Member Hoffman? Member Fagan? Member Hart? A quorum's present.
Thank you. Going on to number 3, public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment and discuss any items not on the agenda that is relevant to or within the authority of the Carson City Charter Review Committee. In order for members of the public to participate in the committee's consideration of an agenda item, the committee strongly encourages members of the public to comment on an agenda item during the item itself. No action may be taken at matters raised under public comment unless the item has specifically included on the agenda as an item upon which action may be taken. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to number 4. For 4A, for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding the election of chair and vice chair of the Charter Review Committee. So I would like to open up nominations for chair. You can nominate yourself or someone else.
I'd like to, this is Ronnie Hanneman. I'd like to nominate Richard Staub, please.
Richard, do you accept the nomination? I do. Okay. Any other nominations? Seeing none, we'll close nominations. All those in favor of Richard Staub being the chairman of the Carson City Charter Review Committee, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Seeing none, congratulations, Richard.
May I find out who seconded?
Oh, yeah, I didn't get a second, sorry.
Was it
Kim's
Kim?
going to second it. Thank you for that correction. Get a second on that. Now we'll open up nominations for vice chair, accepting nominations. We could do it like the PTA and nominate Joe because he's not here. Nobody?
We'll nominate Susan Hoffman for vice chair.
Susan, do you accept the nomination, Susan? Yes. Okay. Any other nominations? Seeing none, we'll close nominations. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. We will now turn it over to Richard to take over for the rest.
Is it on now? Yes, it is. Item 4B is for discussion only, as is the next item. This is review and discussion of the Nevada open meeting law. Jason? Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Staub. Jason Woodbury, Carson City District Attorney for the record. The first 2 agenda items are just basic kind of formalities. I know most of you, actually maybe all of you, have sat on committees or commissions in the past. So a lot of this is already familiar to you. So welcome to the boring agenda items. But we'll try to cruise through these pretty quickly. The first topic is the Nevada open meeting law. There's just pages and pages of requirements under Nevada's open meeting law, and we could certainly get in the weeds and the minutia. But I think what will be most helpful for your purposes is to really focus on the portions of the open meeting law that, as a committee member, you're going to want to be concerned with. You're going to want to kind of watch yourself and how you do things. So that's what we're really going to focus on in my presentation. Certainly, if you have any, subject to the chair's discretion, if you have any questions that you want to ask during the presentation, please do feel free to interrupt me, and I'll do my best to answer those. So I like to start these out with the big idea, like what the purpose behind the open meeting law, because a lot of people get so bogged down in the minutia that we sort of forget what it is we're trying to accomplish with complying with the open meeting law. And the big idea here really goes back to the founding of the United States and the principles upon which it was founded, that all political power is with the people, and that the people, to secure their liberty, establish government. And of course, we have a democratic kind of government. We get to elect our representatives, but the people's role in their government doesn't stop with just electing their representatives and letting them go do whatever it is they're going to do. The philosophy of American government really contemplates active participation by people in their government, active oversight of what their government's doing. And we see that in the First Amendment, which guarantees the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So it's textualized. In our Nevada Constitution, we have that recognition that all political power is inherent in the people. In Article 1, Section 10 guarantees people the right to assemble and petition their government. And that's the idea that we're trying to protect with the open meeting law. So there are three components to the open meeting law that we have to comply with. And the first is notice. As you'll note today, we had a written agenda, and that agenda guides the business that the committee will consider today. That agenda was posted in advance in public places and on the internet, so anyone interested could see exactly what was going to be discussed today, or exactly the subjects that were going to be discussed today. The second component of that is that meetings are going to occur in public. There won't be secret deliberations, there won't be secret decisions. People can watch the process and see what various committee members think and see if they agree with them or don't agree with them. But all that happens in public. There's a handful of exceptions where a public body is allowed to meet in private. None of those exceptions, I wouldn't expect any of the exceptions to apply to this body. But except for those handful of exceptions where the need for privacy outweighs the public's right to see what's going on, everything has to happen in public. And the final one is an opportunity to be heard, that the public has some opportunity to provide input, to give their point of view before the public body for consideration. So those are the three kind of broad things we're trying to protect with the open meeting law. So we'll talk first about notice. And as we discussed a minute ago, that notice comes in the form of a written agenda. It's publicly disseminated. The legal requirement for the agenda is that it must include, quote, a clear and complete statement of topics that will be considered at the meeting. We try to balance that. And this is not something necessarily that the committee needs to be concerned with. The chair does have a role in approving the language of the agenda, making sure it's accurately conveys the subjects that are going to be considered. And certainly any committee member is welcome to take a look at an agenda item. If you have something in particular that you want to present to the committee, you would want to make sure that agenda item captures what you're trying to have discussed. But it has to be clear and complete. We balance that with being concise, because if we gave a clear and complete, we went overboard with the agenda, you'd have agendas that were 20, 25 pages long, and that actually does the opposite of giving the public notice. A lot of people would look at that and say, boy, I don't want to read all that stuff. So we try to be concise as well to make sure that you can get a pretty quick idea of what's going to be discussed. The agenda does have to specifically identify items when there's the potential that you're going to take action on the item. It has to specifically say that. Now, here's how that applies to you. One requirement of the open meeting law is that the way we say it is stay on the agenda, stay on the item. So human dialogue can sometimes organically just start on one topic and gradually move into different areas, and you can arrive at a point when you're really talking about something that's completely different than what was on the agenda. That's my role. My role is to monitor the conversation, make sure we haven't drifted too far. There's some leeway. We try to draft the agenda items so people can have normal kinds of conversation and go in different areas as long as it's on the topic. But if we stray too far, there may be a point in time where I chime in and I say, I think we've moved past the agenda item, so can we please pull it back? And that, I don't mean that to offend anybody, and hopefully nobody takes offense. It's normal human conversation to do that, like I say. And you haven't done anything wrong when we start moving off that. It's just my role. Your role is to have the conversation and just think about what you're doing. It's kind of my role to make sure that we're on the agenda item. And that goes back to the notice, back to the fundamental principle we're trying to protect. If you have an agenda and a member of the public looks at the agenda, they have a right to rely on the fact that you will stay on that agenda item. I'll give you an example. And this probably couldn't happen, so it's not a great example. But let's say you put something on the agenda. We want to consider a provision in the charter to make Mills Park a parking lot, so we have more parking in Carson City. That's the agenda item. And then the discussion flows into, well, I don't think Mills Park is a good spot for a parking lot. I think we need more parking at Fuji Park. So let's talk about that. Well, we're off the agenda item because as a member of the public, you may look at Mills Park and you may say, well, I don't care about that, or a parking lot sounds like a good idea. I hope they do it. But you may care a lot about Fuji Park. And if you'd known that was going to be discussed, you'd have showed up to the meeting to watch what's going on or to have some input on that. So that's kind of the principle we're trying to protect with that. Meetings are public. In one sense, that's very easy. Obviously, we're here in a public place. Public's free to come in or watch online if they'd like to and see everything that's going on. So that part of it's pretty easy, and it's up to staff to provide those accommodations. Gets a little tricky, though, because here's the definition of a meeting, quote, end quote, under the law. It's a gathering of members of a public body at which a quorum is present. So that's the first concept, is quorum. It has to be, because this is a body of 7, has to be 4 of you. In theory, 3 of you could get together for lunch and talk all you want about the stuff because it's not a quorum, it's not a meeting. We don't advise that for the reasons we're going to discuss, but that is something that would be in compliance with the law. So quorum is present, whether in person or by means of electronic communication, to deliberate toward a decision or to take action on any matter over which the public body has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. Okay? So that's the definition of a meeting, and it is broader than just us all being here together today at what you would traditionally think of as a quote-unquote meeting. It can include communication over the phone, and most importantly for us, where we really try to watch things, are emails. It becomes very, very easy to slide into an open meeting law violation communicating by email. And that's what we ask you to watch out for, and we'll give you a few examples. The other thing to note is that a meeting is not necessarily a single event. That's what we're going to talk about here, where we talk about the concept of a, quote, walking quorum. So you go out to lunch, 3 people go out to lunch and have a discussion. And then one of those people who went out to lunch says to a 4th one who didn't attend the lunch, hey, we all met together and this is what we talked about and this is what we think we should do. Now you've got a quorum. Even though it didn't happen all at the same time, at the same place, you've got a quorum, or you've got a meeting, because now a quorum has been included in that conversation. So this includes, a meeting includes a series of gatherings of a public body when you have less than a quorum, and the members of the public body attending one or more of the gatherings collectively constitute a quorum, and the gatherings have the effect of avoiding compliance with the open meeting law. So you have this kind of situation where nobody's having a group communication, but communications are being shared among the group in a way that involves a quorum. So emails are the most dangerous thing here, and it can really happen very innocently, and that's why we ask you to pay special attention to email communications. So let's say we've got this. The city manager writes an email to committee members. Carson City elections should be partisan. Section 5.005 of the charter, which makes all Carson City offices nonpartisan, should be repealed. And that's sent to all committee members. That communication at that point is not an open meeting law violation. It's not a good idea, but we haven't violated anything yet because all you've done so far is receive information. There's been no deliberation, there's been no discussion. You've just received information. And you'll probably get some communications from citizens who have an idea and they want to present the idea to you for your consideration. So they're not concerned with the open meeting law. They shouldn't be, and they send it to all of you. But then we get a situation where, Member Fegan, I know you would never do this, but let's say you reply all and you say, I agree. Those two small communications, that's going to put us in a violation situation because she has shared her opinion of that idea with a quorum of this. So that's deliberation. That puts us in a place where we've technically, under the law, had a meeting, and we want to avoid that. If you are inclined, the best advice I can give you is to reserve all the discussion that you want to have about something for this meeting. That's not to say don't meet with people. That's not to say don't review and research and things like that. But as far as the open meeting law, anything you say in here, we're good. We're in a public meeting. Now, I don't know if that's realistic, but that legally that would be the safest course for you. But if you are inclined to have communications, you've got to be very careful in emails about who you're replying to. Are you replying to a quorum of this body? And the way we avoid it probably doesn't have a lot of consequence for this body, but from time to time, I need to have a communication with the Board of Supervisors or a different body. And what we'll do is we'll just blind copy all the members of the public body. That way, if a member, and we ask them not to reply, but if a member does reply, they're only replying to me. They're not replying to the other members of the public body. So if we did the same example, but instead of just sending the city manager's message to everybody, it was sent by blind copy. Member Fegan replies and says, I agree. No violation in that circumstance. Okay, so the final component of the open meeting law that we try to protect is the public's opportunity to be heard. So that provision of Nevada Revised Statute sets a floor, sets the minimum of what we have to do. We have to have 2 periods of public comment, one at the very beginning of the meeting and one at the very end. These 2 public comment periods are for the public to have input on anything that is within the jurisdiction of this body, within the power of this body to do something about. So if somebody came in here talking about a California law that they didn't like, the chair would be within his discretion to say, I'm going to cut you off there because that's not something within our authority. But basically, if it has anything to do with Carson City, it's probably going to be within this body's authority. That's the minimum. The agenda as it's been prepared today, and I would anticipate as it's going to be prepared in the future, goes beyond that and says that this body will provide an opportunity during each item for the public to have a public comment period. This can be more efficient because instead of hearing all the comments at once, you're actually hearing it, receiving it when the item is before you. So that goes above and beyond the minimum, but that's what's on the agenda for today. Do's and don'ts for public comment. Some of this is legal and within my lane. Some of it is just advice that I've gotten from members of public bodies and kind of incorporated into this. So the do's, make sure the speaker identifies himself or herself. That's for tomorrow and having a good record of who made the comment. We are legally required to accommodate special needs for a person who wants to make a public comment. We should provide varying methods of receiving public comment. If somebody wants to email or something like that, that should be accommodated. Be prepared for confrontational items. I don't think this body should expect much of that, hopefully, but it comes up, and people you get pretty emotionally involved in some things, so you want to be prepared for that. And you want to, and to some extent, we can game plan for how we're going to deal with those controversial items. So everybody has the opportunity to have their input, but does so in a productive, helpful kind of way. The don'ts are don't interrupt the speaker. There's a few exceptions to that when the speaker is basically out of line, where that can happen. But very much in general, if you just disagree with what the person's saying, it's not really the time for that kind of interaction. It's more for them to have the input that they want to have. You can't legally deliberate or take action on any of the speaker's comments, even if you think it's a great idea or a terrible idea. It's not the time to actually have that kind of discussion. Speakers are not entitled to have more than one turn during a public comment period. And that's just a matter of fairness to everybody who wants to have a comment. These are just more kind of advice from other members of public body that I've received. It can be bad form to ignore the speaker, like visibly be ignoring that person and not listening to them. It can be kind of frustrating for them. And we ask at our commission, our committees and commissions, that the public speaker not be allowed to directly address a member of staff or a particular committee member. It just puts you in a bad spot because you're going to be somewhat limited. You can interact with them, but you can't start deliberation with the other members of the public body. Just creates kind of a dangerous situation. So that's what we try to avoid. I won't spend a lot of time on this. Can a time limit be imposed? It can be. Does have to be on the agenda. I wouldn't anticipate this body getting a lot of public comment, but if that's something that the chair or any majority had an appetite for, it's certainly something that could be imposed. It does have to appear on the agenda so the public has forewarning about that. A person can be denied the opportunity to make a comment, and that goes back to if the comment is beyond the authority of the board, if it's being presented, with offensive language and things like that, or it's basically a personal attack on somebody. Those are the types of comments that can be shut down. Like I said, I'm optimistic that won't be at issue here. In an extreme case, a disruptive person can be removed from the meeting entirely. That is within the chair's discretion. It doesn't take a vote of the majority of the committee. If it's disruptive, and it has to be really disruptive to the point where you cannot conduct the meeting in an orderly way, that would be the trigger for somebody to be removed by the chair. Some general information, open meeting law applies to public bodies, so it doesn't apply to all meetings that the government may have. If I have a staff meeting in my office, that's not subject to the open meeting law. As I said, there are a few exceptions to the requirements of the open meeting law. Curiously, the Nevada legislature, who created the open meeting law, has also exempted itself from the open meeting law, but they do a pretty decent job of doing their best to follow the requirements, but they are technically exempt. There is a complaint process, So if somebody believes an open meeting law violation has occurred, they submit a complaint to the Attorney General's office. Somewhat recently, it's been a few years now, but we got the opportunity to take corrective action. So if a complaint was ever submitted and it was something we agreed, yeah, that probably was a violation, we would have the opportunity to take corrective action to fix the error that was made, and we would certainly try to take every opportunity to do that. So that would be my presentation on the open meeting law, subject to any questions the chair is willing to entertain.
No,
Questions
just,
from the committee?
just a comment, if I may. Sir, this is probably one of the best open meeting explanations I've heard, so thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate that, and, you know, we have made mistakes in our open meeting law presentations and just thrown a lot of detail that frankly, I think isn't very useful. So we try to keep it very high level, because that's the stuff you should be concerned with. So I appreciate that. Okay.
Any other questions? Jason, I would ask one question. Public comment, matters not on the agenda.
If it's within your authority, you actually have to receive the public comment, even though it's not on the agenda. And because of the nature of this body, because you're talking about the charter, if it has to do with Carson City, it's probably going to be within the purview of this body to do something about if you chose to or not. But yeah, that's the distinction. It does not have, during those two public, the first and the last, I'm not going to call it a free-for-all, but that's the broader time for the public to make a comment on anything that is within your authority.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And with that, if there's no other questions, we'll move forward to item 4C, and that is review and discussion on the Nevada ethics in government law. Jason?
Thank you, Chair Staub. Okay, so same idea with this. I brought my ethics manual. It's about 1.5 inches thick. We could get way into the weeds on this. I'm going to try to keep it conceptual and at that level that hopefully is going to be most helpful for you. But each member of this committee is subject to the Nevada ethics in government law. So that's the first thing you need to know is it does apply to you. Again, let's start with what's the big idea here? What is the concept? What is the principle we're trying to protect? And it comes from this provision of Nevada law. A public office is a public trust and shall be held for the sole benefit of the people. So that's all the law wants you to be concerned with, and you wouldn't be a member of this committee if you didn't believe it too. You're here to act in the best interests of the people of Carson City. And if there's some other circumstance that could prevent you or impair your judgment from acting in the sole interest of Carson City, you know, that's something we would need to address. That's something the law is trying to look out for. So public office is a public trust, but we recognize human nature, that a person's decisions can be influenced by financial interests, relationships, and personal benefits. Those are the three broad categories that the ethics in government law tries to address. In legal terms, those kinds of things create a conflict of interest. You have a personal interest that could impair your judgment and your duty to act in the best interests of Carson City. So what is a conflict of interest? It's defined as a significant pecuniary interest. Pecuniary is just money, anything having to do with money. It can be a commitment in a private capacity. You have some personal connection with somebody who has an interest in an item that is before you, or it can be the acceptance of a gift or a loan. So the significant pecuniary interest can be very simple. And this is the simple example. Committee's dissatisfied with its current legal representation, considering agenda item that proposes to amend the charter to add the following provision. The law office of Richard Staub shall serve as legal counsel for the Charter Review Committee, shall be paid a fee of $10,000 per meeting from the Carson City General Fund. Chairman Staub obviously has a conflict of interest because it's a significant pecuniary interest in the issue. He's got to abstain from voting and participating in the deliberation of this item. So that's kind of a duh situation. But they get a lot tougher when they get more nuanced. So let's talk about this first example. Member Weiss owns stock in Tesla, and we're looking at an agenda item that would amend the charter to say that all vehicles purchased by Carson City must be Teslas. Is his pecuniary interest significant? Because remember, it has to be a significant pecuniary interest. That's going to depend on a lot of things. How much stock does he have? Is it $1,000, $100,000? How much is this really going to matter to a giant company like Tesla that they have an exclusive contract in Carson City? Is that really going to impact the stock price? And I couldn't give an answer to this question today, hypothetically, and I wouldn't expect the committee members to have that answer at their fingertips either. It's just to show you can get kind of a nuanced situation that gets pretty tricky to deal with. So let's say Member Hoffman's considering a run for sheriff. She believes she has a good chance to win, but with no law enforcement experience and popular incumbent, her chances are actually quite slim. Could she participate and vote on a proposed amendment to the charter that would raise the sheriff's annual compensation to $250,000? Hypothetically, she may have a significant pecuniary interest because that's a big raise. But there's a lot of future involved in it. Does it matter that she thinks she has a good chance, but in reality, she probably doesn't have a very good chance? So those are, it gets very fuzzy where that line can be. And that's something I want you to kind of accept, that it's not always going to be as clear-cut as the law office of Richard Staub example. It can get very fuzzy. So we talk about commitment in a private, and I'm going to have some advice on how to deal with those fuzzy things in a minute. Commitment in a private capacity. So if you've got a spouse or domestic partner who has a particular interest in an item, that can be the same as you personally having a conflict of interest. And that's what we're talking about here is, under the law, what people are in your life that if they have a conflict of interest, you have a conflict of interest. What are those close kind of relationships? A member of your household, whether blood-related or not, if they're in your house. A close family member or in-law within the third degree of consanguinity. That's father, that's parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews, and it stops at third cousins. So those are the relationships that are covered under that. Your employer, or the employer of your spouse, or a member of your household. If you have a substantial and a continuing business relationship with someone. So it could have been substantial, but if it's ended at this point, you wouldn't fall under that because it's not continuing. Or if it's, a fairly minor business relationship, that wouldn't be captured by that. And then the law just throws in any relationship that is substantially similar to this. Your best friend is like your brother or your sister, and that's the way you feel. And if, even though they're not captured in there, if you feel, that's how I think of that person, that might create a conflict of interest for you. Okay, so you've identified in your mind a possible conflict of interest, but maybe we're in that fuzzy area where I'm not sure this is a significant pecuniary interest. This might not rise to that level. What do I do? And that's where we come in. That's where you want to make use of our office. The DA's office represents you, represents this committee, and represents the committee members. And that's what we're there for, either a call or an email. And these questions, like I said, become very nuanced. And sometimes they're going to be questions that we have to put some time and some research into. So the sooner you can identify a conflict and get in touch with us, the better the better advice we're going to be able to give you. So we can help determine, is your situation actually a conflict of interest, or does this not fall under one of those legal definitions? Does your situation create an appearance of impropriety? We'll talk about disclosure in a minute, but the ethics and government law sometimes requires disclosure, sometimes requires abstention, meaning you can't advocate for a position or vote on something, and sometimes it requires both. This appearance of impropriety situation is one that's going to require a disclosure, but you can continue to participate in the item. Because, yeah, okay, it looks bad if you have certain information, but when I explain it, when I disclose it in public, and I'm able to say, I don't believe this is going to impair my judgment, I've disclosed the information, we've done what we need to do for the public, and it's all open. It's all transparent, and nobody can go whispering, oh, this information was at issue and nobody said anything about it. And in an extreme case, it might be a situation that's so close, we just need to go to the Ethics Commission. We need to go to the people who enforce this stuff and say, here's the situation, what do you want us to do, basically? Okay, so this is where this part comes in. We're here to help. We're not here to, make life miserable for you. So let us help you. And I said advance notice is much appreciated because these things get kind of complicated, but it's never too late to do the right thing. And if you're sitting here in a meeting and something comes up and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even see this connection, but I may have a conflict of interest. Bring it up. Don't feel like it's too late. But like I said, the best way for us to help you is for us to have the conversation as early as possible. And I don't need to worry about this with this group, but we need a full picture of the facts and of the circumstances to give you the best advice that we can. So we'll ask for that. The reason why this is so important is it gives you immunity from liability under the ethics and government law. If you ask me for advice, hey, can I participate in this item? And here are the circumstances. And I say, yes, you can. And I blew it. I screwed it up. I gave you bad advice. And actually, it was a conflict of interest. You shouldn't have participated in the item. That's on me. That's not on you. And you can't be prosecuted for an ethics violation because you were relying on the advice of counsel. So that can be obviously a big help. Okay, so disclosure. Like we talked about, some appearances of impropriety, some actual conflict of interest only require disclosure, okay? You've got a financial interest in something, but it's not a significant pecuniary interest. You want to disclose the financial interest, but you don't believe it's significant enough to impair your judgment. We're going to disclose it. We're going to put it all in public, and then you're going to be allowed to participate. So the disclosure has to be made in a public meeting. It does have to be sufficient to inform the public of what the situation is. It can't be I have a possible conflict of interest. It's got to be some detail about what the situation is, and it has to be offered before any presentation of the item. For obvious reasons, you want to know in advance. So this is the next part of ethics and government law, and these are situations that are going to require abstention, okay? You're actually not going to be able to advocate a position or vote on an item. And that is required when the conflict of interest would materially affect the independence of judgment of a reasonable person. So a lot of legal words in there, and that's what we're here to help with. But basically, it's going to create a situation where that conflict of interest prevents you from acting solely in the interest of Carson City, which is what you're supposed to do. Means you can't vote or advocate on an agenda item. Technically, you can still participate in the discussion. We don't advise that. What we advise, the safest course is to actually physically remove yourself from the dais and move to a position. Because even though it's allowed, there's such a fine line between just offering factual information versus advocating in favor or against an item, that it can be very easy to sway into, hey, I'm actually trying to persuade this person. I'm not just giving them facts. So that's what we advise is the best practice. So that's the last point there. Sure.
There we go. Is it possible that a member of a board could disqualify themselves and become a member of the public and take a position?
No, we would advise against that because even though you are not speaking in the capacity of being a member of the board, you're still trying to advocate a position. And the fact is you are a member of the board and drawing that line between I'm not speaking in that capacity, I'm speaking in my personal capacity, in my opinion would, I wouldn't be comfortable with it. So I'd advise against it. Okay, so this can be an area where technically you have a conflict of interest, but you're not required to abstain. And that is a situation where the interest you have is not more greatly affected than anyone else in that position. The example I thought of actually has to do with COVID, which hopefully doesn't have a lot of relevance anymore. But let's say we wanted a charter provision saying, for public health and safety reasons, we're only going to allow restaurants to operate at 10% of their total capacity, okay? Your brother owns a restaurant. You have a conflict of interest because it's going to have an impact on a significant pecuniary impact on somebody who is related to you within the third degree of consanguinity. You have a conflict of interest. But the impact on your brother is no greater than the impact on any other restaurant owner. It's all the same. So that would potentially be a situation where even though you have a conflict of interest, and you would want to disclose that, but it wouldn't necessarily require abstention under that kind of circumstance. Abstention is only authorized in quote-unquote clear cases where the independence of judgment is materially affected. And the ethics in government law is kind of hypocritical here. It's saying, on the one hand, be cautious and abstain. But on the other hand, it's only required in clear cases. The law does recognize that you have value, you add value to this committee, and you're here for a reason. And the reason you're here is to deliberate and vote and make decisions. And anytime you remove somebody from that, you're having an adverse impact on the committee. Sometimes you have to do it, but it's only required in those, like I say, clear cases. So this is just a list of the do's and don'ts. You don't want to accept gifts. So if somebody's got an agenda item they're interested in for the next week's meeting, they want to take you out to lunch. Is that a significant gift? Is that going to sway the independence of your judgment? Probably not, but it may not be a very good idea to do either. You don't want to use your position to secure an unwarranted advantage. I don't think a lot of this has hopefully much to do with this committee because, you know, you have a specific duration, but that's more for standing committees and in those types of things. Don't want to engage in self-dealing, use your position for your own benefit. You don't want to use your position somehow to get private compensation. You don't want to misuse information that you receive in the course of your duties. Can't use government resources for your personal benefit. Can't influence subordinates in regard to your personal or pecuniary interest. And you can't use your position to try to secure other employment and things. Like I said, probably none of those really apply to this particular committee, but that's kind of the laundry list of things. So that would conclude, Mr. Chairman, my presentation on the Nevada Ethics and Government Law.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. Any questions from the committee members? And I guess I forgot it on the last one, but I believe I have to ask, are there any questions from the public, right?
Because these are for information only, I'm comfortable with you doing that or not doing that. Probably good to get in the habit of
Yeah.
those.
So I thought, you know, I've been through a few boards and committees myself, as you know.
Yes.
And at least on the hospital board, I introduced a requirement they take an oath of office at the hospital because I felt that that was the first mechanism to potentially be ethical and put everyone on notice of what their ethical requirements were. And the other thing that another board I served on, the airport committee, airport authority, a member called me and asked me about a conflict of interest. And I told them, and I've tried to live by this all throughout my public career, and that was, if you think there's a conflict, there is.
That's a good way to think about it.
That's right. And I said, it's the easiest way to protect yourself is you don't have to have any judgment. If you think there's a conflict, there probably is. And the other one was, when in doubt, disclose or abstain. So that's the two simple things that I've tried to live by, and it's kept me out of trouble so far. So
It's good advice. You never get in trouble that way.
thank you. Any other questions on those comments? Hearing none, okay, we'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Jason. Let's, item 4D, which is page 10 in your packet. This is discussion and possible action regarding the Carson City Charter Review Committee bylaws, and apparently there's some comments from Ms. Hicks, and apparently 3 potential modifications you want to go over.
Yes, thank you, Chair Stubb. I wanted to advise you in the committee that Mr. Hart has actually joined us on WebEx, and if permissible, if we could take a brief recess, we could swear him in, speaking of oath of office, so that he can join us for the rest of the meeting.
Sure, that's no problem, and I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask whether everybody has taken their oaths so we don't run into those issues down the line. Thank you. Go ahead, yes.
Thank you. So yes, if
We'll
we,
we'll be adjourned for a few minutes. Charter Review Committee. The next item is item 4D. This is page 10 in your packet.
Is your microphone on?
Yeah, it's on.
Oh,
Do I need to press this up here?
no, I have a delay.
Okay. I think we're back with Stephanie, right? Go ahead, thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie Hicks, Deputy City Manager, for the record. The Charter Review Committee bylaws were established to document the process used for the committee to receive input on possible amendments to the Carson City Charter. In reviewing this internally, staff notified three items that we'd like to correct, and should the committee approve that today, we could also hear any other items the committee may be interested in changing today or in the future. Those three items, I'll just real briefly go over. Section 1 references Section 1.090 with a subsection of 2 and 3, and there actually isn't a 3, so we're just going to change that to a 1 and 2. Under Section 3, staff recommends removing the reference to physically posting in at least 4 locations, which no longer is required under open meeting law. And then lastly, under Section 6, staff recommends changing clerk recorder to city manager regarding where written notifications should be sent.
Thank you. Any discussion on these recommended 3 changes to the charter, to the bylaws?
Just for background information, why did they want to change it to the city manager instead of the clerk?
We actually collect that for the most part anyway. So and I'll talk a little bit more about that public input process. So just to alleviate, one more transmission.
Any other questions, comments? Any questions, comments from the public? Hearing none, the matters before us, I'd entertain a motion. Have a motion, do I have a second?
Second by Wilkie.
Wilkie, thank you. Any
I'm sorry,
discussion on
is
the?
this approval as amended?
Approved as amended, does the first approve the amendment?
Yes.
Does the second? Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
The amendments carry. Thank you. Moving on to item 4E, page 13 in your packet. This is discussion of possible action regarding the process and timeline for the 2022 Charter Review Committee, identification of charter provisions that staff or the committee wish to evaluate for potential amendment at future meetings, and possible discussion to staff. Ms. Hicks?
Thank you. For the record, Stephanie Hicks, Deputy City Manager. So the governing ordinance requires that proposed amendments to the charter be heard and debated by the committee, who then will advise the Board of Supervisors with regard to recommendations of the committee that concern necessary amendments. In the background and process handout that we included in this item's packet, we indicated that the first meeting would take place in February to elect officers, which we're doing today, review Nevada open meeting law, and discuss process and procedures, and establish future meeting dates. So the goal is that the committee will meet at least one time in April to consider community input, and additional meetings may be scheduled if necessary to review proposed amendments. The committee will present proposed amendments to the Board of Supervisors, typically in July. This year, we intend to solicit public input starting today, February 24th, through March 21st. And that includes the distribution of a press release. And then we also have, press release and other social media releases. We have a link on our website where people can just enter into the comments there, right on the website, or again, they can submit something in writing through the city manager's office. I know in years past, there has not necessarily been changes to the charter, but we do have a few items that we've been discussing here at the city that we would propose for your consideration, and I just wanted to briefly make you aware of those. The first one is in section 1.060, subsection 3, and that discusses the creation of ward boundaries. As we worked our way through that redistricting process this year, we noticed that there is a date in there that the realignment has to occur before January 1st. And that's not something required in statute, it just, other than in our charter. And so we'd like to remove that date just to allow for a little more flexibility. We'll be bringing this forward for your discussion with the rest of the recommendations, but this is just to give you a preliminary review of it. And then additionally, there is a recommendation to clarify the language in section 3.015. With the passing of Mayor Bob in September of 2020, we realized that when the mayor pro tem steps into that position temporarily, there's no one in that particular ward. In this particular instance, we only had a few months until the next office was taken, but it could be a longer period. And so we just want to include some provisions in the future of how to fill that ward vacancy, ward supervisor's ward vacancy.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks. Any questions from the committee on this item?
What is the procedure to fill the vacancy prior to the election? Is there one? Appointment?
There's not. At this point, the mayor pro tem steps into the mayor's seat, but essentially serves in both roles as the ward supervisor and the mayor. So that could leave a board of 4 people for an extended period of time,
Or fewer?
or fewer.
Thank you, Bob. Any other questions, discussion? Any questions from the public? Do we need a motion of any kind? Okay, then we'll proceed on to 4F, discussion of possible action on future agenda items and meeting dates and possible direction to staff on same. In your packet, staff is recommending April 8th, May 20th, and June 17th of this year. Ms. Hicks?
Thank you. And as I stated previously, we may not need all of these dates. We just thought with everybody's schedules, it might be nice to get some things out there ahead of those milestones. The other question that I would also ask is if 1:30 is a good time for the committee to meet and if that works for everybody. But those were dates that we were able to verify that we have this meeting room open, but we are open to other suggestions and can confirm additional dates.
Member Hoffman?
Thank you. I'm not going to be available on April 8th. We're going to be out of town, and I would really hate to miss the first meeting. So if there's any way we could move that around, that would be great for me. And yes, 1:30 works well for me. As any other time because I'm retired, so.
Any other conflicts by the committee members? I'm okay with the change from the 8th, and I'm okay on the 20th and 17th. And 1:30 is fine.
Tentatively, I would propose the 15th, if that would work for everybody. I can also confirm a few other dates and we can just get back. Well, that's our next meeting, so we do need to set that, don't we? So I would propose the 15th of April.
Does the 15th seem appropriate?
It's a Friday.
A Friday?
I hate to be the one, this is Hanneman, but I will be on vacation on the 15th.
Any other issues? Do we have another date?
I guess we could look at either the 6th or the 12th, if everybody wants to look at their calendars real quick as I throw those out there. It looks like the room is open. We'll just make sure there aren't any other conflicts.
The 6th, this is Hanneman, the 6th is good for me. I'm obviously going to be gone the 12th as well, since I'm gone that whole week.
Okay.
Any other conflicts?
We're, the 6th, well, it doesn't work for me. We're gone that whole week, but the 12th works. I hate to be a pain. And you know what? Thing came off.
Can we go back into March, maybe?
Can they attend online like Mr. Hart?
I think so. I'm going to be on the East Coast, so it'll be 3 hours difference, but I suppose I could.
And so that could work for the 12th then? That was the date, Ronnie, that you were,
I'm thinking so.
okay.
So tentatively, we're looking at the 12th of April, the 20th of May, and the 17th of June. Do we need a motion on that? Yes? Are there any further discussions on this issue? I would entertain a motion then.
I move that we set the following meeting dates of April 12th, May 20th, and June 17th, 2022 at 1:30.
We have first by Wilkie, and who's second? Thank you. Kim? All the matters before us, any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Matter carries. Thank you, Mr. Hart.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just to clean it up, could you ask for public comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there any public comment on these dates? Seeing none, the matter is now behind us. Thank you. That brings us to the end of our formal agenda. It's again time for public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on any matter that is not specifically included on the agenda as an action item. No action may be taken on a matter raised under this item of the agenda. Is there any public comment on matters not on the agenda? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn unless the committee has any other comments on agenda items.
I make a motion to adjourn, Ms. Hanneman.
Have a second?
I second it.
Wise second. Matters before us. All those in favor, please say aye. Matter carries. Opposed? Matter carries. Thank you. We are adjourned.